So what I learned from that experience, Neelu, is whenever you're doing whatever you're doing in vulnerability management program, you need to articulate what is your objective, why are you doing, what are you doing, and if you don't do this, what does it mean for them?
Okay, so vulnerability management is a topic which is still relevant today. What does that mean to you, Vishal? You've seen vulnerabilities for a very long time now.
If you talk about certain vulnerabilities like OpenSSL or certain vulnerabilities related to different packages, the general guidance most of the tools publish is if you are running a version 1, they'll ask you to upgrade to 1.1. If you're running a version 1.2, they'll ask you to upgrade to version 1.3.
How do you address this friction? Because I think friction is the one big practical challenge if you are maturing in security or managing vulnerabilities.
One is motivated to take that step, is involved, is interested. Well, I know that person wants to, intent is there, but that person doesn't know how to do it.
There have been some other episodes on this. We have a lot of supply chain based episodes as well. But in terms of having the governance model for this, who should have the accountability of fixing the issue? So where should the ownership lie according to you?
In a true sense, in my opinion, accountability should be with the person who owns that system or that's the line of business. The profits come to that person. So these threats and security and the risk also should be with that person. Okay.
So if you have any stories of having done that, please share with us.
They didn't let me leave the room until they got it in written from me that I've deleted all that information from my system. That was a long night for me.
Welcome to Breakpoint. I'm your host, Neelu, and here we are decoding the bleeding edge of cybersecurity. We are here to challenge assumptions, explore breakthrough defense, and learn from some of the most innovative minds in the field. Enjoy, folks.
Hi, and welcome everyone to this episode of Breakpoint. The topic for today is vulnerability management and remediation. Our guest for today is Vishal Kalro. He's the CISO and DPO at Quantiphi. Welcome to Breakpoint, Vishal.
Thank you, Neelu. Pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, so vulnerability management is a topic which is still relevant today, while we've been talking a lot about shifting left and all of that. For many of us in the industry, it looks very different, the vulnerability, or in simple words, the security weaknesses that we have in the system, they start with whenever we start having tech. So whether it is your networks or applications or products you start using, all of them come with certain set of vulnerabilities. And then we start the journey of identifying those and fixing those. If you have even one person in the security team, that's where your vulnerability management sort of begins. Now, it looks different for smaller companies where they may be struggling with even identifying vulnerabilities initially. Mid-sized organization where they have now started getting a lot of vulnerabilities and they're trying to manage it. And enterprises where they have a fixed set process of the SLAs and what is the vulnerability life cycle looks like and all of that. What does that mean to you, Vishal? You've seen vulnerabilities for a very long time now.
So, Neelu, first of all, once again, thanks for having me here. And this is an interesting conversation, very close to my heart. Before I get started, I just want to make sure that, I put it across. Whatever I'm going to be sharing on this channel is my personal view, nothing to do with my companies that I've worked with. So I have around 2.5 decades of experience working on different, facets of cybersecurity. I've been a GRC professional. I have been a cybersecurity analyst. I have been a ethical hacker. Now I'm playing a role of a CISO. So I have 2.5 decades of experience. And when we look at what you really mentioned, the vulnerabilities, when we scan, when we come up with the vulnerabilities, the main thing is it's not about identifying the vulnerabilities. It's about how do we get them remediated? How do we prioritize them? How do we get them remediated? And more often than not, if it is a smaller organization, a closed group working, lesser number of assets that you're talking about, it's easier to, go ahead and address and fix those vulnerabilities, based on prioritization. But very often what happens is that, there is a central team or a corporate team or a corporate function like a CISO function, which has an operational role. They do all the, scanning, they assess all the apps, all the endpoints, clouds, systems, all the servers and everything, and they identify all the vulnerabilities. And there are tons of those vulnerabilities that are getting published on a regular basis. And then they start working with individual asset owner to figure out how that needs to be fixed. And then if you look at it from a GRC or an internal auditor hat, they are like, oh, you know what? I see so many vulnerabilities in a report. And when they audit the CISO function, hey, why are your vulnerabilities not getting closed? Why are they, they keep piling up and they don't get closed? So the internal audit does not understand the operational challenge that the CISO function goes through when it comes to addressing or remediating the vulnerabilities. And that is always the story has always been that way. And my thought process here is that we need to think about, or we need to have the fix mindset, the fix first mindset, where the CISO function or the operational function or security operations function who is owning that vulnerability management program should not just look at doing the scans, identifying the vulnerabilities, and publishing it to the asset owner. They should be looking at, like, okay, look, while we have identified the vulnerabilities, we need to do a proper prioritization, not just based on what a tool is telling us, but basis what our current environment looks like. Basis what controls we already know are in place. We have EDRs, we have CSPM and other solutions running in. Given those controls that we have, what is the right prioritization of the vulnerabilities in our current environment, and then we reprioritize those vulnerabilities depending upon the criticality of the asset. They need to work with the asset owners hand in hand to and the operation function like the cloud ops, DevOps, or the server operations, or the data center management functions. Work with them hand in hand to understand what it takes or what will it take to remediate those vulnerabilities. After this due diligence is done, that is where they need to work with individual asset owner and make them understand that, look, while you need to fix this vulnerability, but this is how you fix it as well. Don't just give it to them that, like, look, this is your problem, you take it, do it, or it's up to you. You help them fix as well. That's what is critical. That's the that's a shift that we should be looking at going forward.
Okay, yeah, that was a good explanation, Vishal, that you gave. Let's start looking at it from a security standpoint first, right? So you have been on both the sides, creating vulnerabilities and getting it processed and fixed. From the perspective of a security team, right, when we start identifying these vulnerabilities, there are tons of them. So it's one thing to start scanning and do manual testing and have bug bounties and you can have so many things to identify vulnerabilities. But then once you really start getting vulnerabilities, the biggest challenge that security teams face is the sheer volume of vulnerabilities. And that can range from, of course, hundreds to even thousands of vulnerabilities at any given time, depending on the size of the organization, the exposure, the attack surface, and things like that. This is a big challenge for many security teams. How do you think teams should be actually handling it?
So that is where and this problem has been there from time in when I started my career back in 2006. This was a problem then. Today we are in close to 2026. The problem still persists. Okay, so this problem is still there in one form or the other, and it will continue unless you know how to solve for it and what to do to solve for it. Not that I'm saying that we'll be getting it to an absolute zero, but in a reasonable or a manageable, you need to get to a place where it's manageable. I'll put it that way. Okay, so when you look at the sheer volume, okay, it's a lot of it is noise. Honestly speaking, Neelu, it's not that everything all out there is making all it's not the right tangible information. That a lot of it is noise. For example, if you talk about certain vulnerabilities like OpenSSL or certain vulnerabilities related to different packages, the general guidance most of the tools publish is if you are running a version 1, they'll ask you to upgrade to 1.1. If you're running a version 1.2, they'll ask you to upgrade to version 1.3. So there is a way where you can fine tune all of those things and make sure that the recommendation comes out where if you're running 1 and the most latest version of that package is 2, the recommendation should be upgraded to be done once and for all. That itself, many such fine tuning itself will reduce a lot of noise in what you're publishing in terms of the number of vulnerabilities. That is one way of looking at it. Again, a very tactical way,
Okay.
but this is one way of looking at it. Okay. The other way of looking at it, as I said earlier, is that when you look at these vulnerability, the prioritization is important. And the prioritization not necessarily only on the CVS score or the MITRE recommendations and all of that. It's also based on your environment. What is the potential exploitability? Do you have compensating controls in place? If all of that is in place, you do a prioritization. I'm not saying that you ignore the vulnerability. You do a prioritization. You do a prioritization based on the criticality of your assets, so that you're basically what you're doing is you're dissecting your problem in a way where it is manageable and it is actionable, rather than looking at the problem as a whole and getting overwhelmed. You are making it actionable, right? Once you have this, so this is where your vulnerability management team will have to play an additional role, where they need to re-look at how these things are being structured and restructure this particular piece. Now once this is done, most of the companies these days are cloud native or cloud first companies. Okay, surely they have cloud ops and DevOps function. I understand many of the cloud ops and DevOps function are hesitant to, while they might have, company-wide access to the cloud accounts and all of that, they might be able to run the fixes and address those remediation or address those vulnerabilities, but they're hesitant for the right reason. Because if they run something from the backend, something breaks on the developer side and something goes off the hook, they'll be blamed for it, right? So I'm sure they are very hesitant, but at the same time, there are means by which they can be involved in more from a research perspective, where let's look at what are those from a volume perspective. Okay, this is a set of critical vulnerabilities, and this is from a quantification perspective as well. This is where it materializes that so many number of vulnerabilities across different assets. Let's see how these could be resolved. Let's do a small sandbox and let's try to address a vulnerability. Let's see what breaks, what doesn't break, and all that. Come up with run books, come up with cheat sheets. Okay, those things which DevOps or the cloud ops team has vetted, the vulnerability management team can take those cheat sheets to the respective asset owners, the different verticals and all that. Look, these are the cheat sheets you can follow, and if you follow these, your vulnerability count will come down by 10%, 15%, 20%. So that the person on the receiving end who has to fix the vulnerability also feels good. Oh, you know what? You give me something to easily consume. And on top of that, what you could also do is the vulnerability management team could be a little more proactive, in my view, and say that, look, you know what? I will partner with you. Let's get on a common call. Let's understand what your environment looks like. Why don't you run this in a non-prod environment, these cheat sheets that I've given you? Let's see what the outcome looks like, right? If something breaks, I have my cloud ops team, with me. They will, back us up and they will fix things for us right away. In those measured way, if you work with the end users or the end people who are responsible for the vulnerability remediation, it will reinstate the confidence. It will give them the morale boost as well, that look, this is something more meaningful. Rather than dumping hundreds and thousands of vulnerabilities on their face and they say, you know what, it's so bad that I can't fix it, so let it just be as is, right? So this is how you can break down the problem and make it more actionable and more meaningful. And as you grow, gain traction around this, the vulnerability management team is motivated because they see a movement there. The DevOps cloud ops team feels good because they are making a meaningful difference. They are playing a security role out there. They are expanding their DevOps mindset to DevSecOps. Okay, the end people who are responsible for those remediation, they take security seriously and they are able to make those meaningful impact with help of both the teams. So the three teams together make those meaningful impact. And beyond that, what I would also like to add, Neelu, in my experience, today we have so many foundation LLMs, right? You have Gemini, you have
Yeah.
Claude, you have so many foundation LLMs. Okay, I'm sure most of the companies have their own preferred enterprise LLMs, or they have built their own models on some foundation LLMs, blah blah blah, whatever that is. Okay, the simple thing you could do is just dump your reports, your VA reports, to the your LLM or your AI model and ask that AI model to behave as a security analyst and see what it gives you. A lot of those learnings can help your vulnerability management team improvise from what they have been doing as a traditional practice, and then you can see a lot of change there.
Yeah, I think from current to the modern times, you've covered all and everything, and I think very practical aspects, which is specifically about the involving the DevOps team and their contribution. I think it's a very practical but also very collaborative approach because when I started looking at okay, what can really break, right? When I was very new to security, it's really unpredictable what things can break, and that paralysis that engineering teams have is oftentimes for the right reasons. It's very good to first test it out in a sandbox environment, like you mentioned, where that fear goes away first of all, and then you can take them in the direction of remediation. But one of the things which comes out of this is because you talked about actually in just increasing the relevance of the findings rather than the number, because they're relevant in the context that you have. I was thinking of the business risk because you have seen it both from a compliance angle, from a leadership angle, and when you are in leadership, you're not just thinking of compliance, you're thinking of real security, and you're thinking of what is really the business risk, because the CIO may ask, the engineering leads will ask, what is the real business risk we have if we don't fix some of these. So how do you tie these to the real business risk? How do you optimize these and tie these to the business risk on the ground?
I mean, that is what it's all about, right? Security is all about how it impacts business, right? It's all about that. And everything has to be tied back to business. So when you talk about vulnerabilities tying back to business, it's all depends upon the assets and the business processes where these vulnerabilities are found. If these vulnerabilities are in your financial systems, then any exploitation of those vulnerabilities will directly impact your financials, your reporting. And similarly, if they are in any of your products or the projects that you're driving, it may have a negative impact on the products that you're publishing. So the way I look at it is, again, the prioritization of the vulnerabilities, look at the compensatory control that are in place, look at the assets to which these vulnerabilities are tagged or to which these vulnerabilities belong. Are they belonging to the financial systems, products, or some delivery projects that teams are working on, or are they belonging to some in-house systems? Accordingly, you can tie a dollar value to it, basis on the criticality and the ease of exploitation, as we all know, right? The other piece is when we talk about the business impact, while this is how you can say, okay, you can say that, okay, this vulnerability, because it's in a financial system, it may have a negative impact on our reporting, or our reporting might not be proper if this is exploited, or our reporting systems might go down during a quarter end or during the year end, whatever. So this is how you relate to a particular business impact per se, or a product might get impacted. We might not be able to provide the SLA that we have promised our customers and all that. Beyond that, any exploitation of vulnerability is a direct, a risk to your brand, whichever brand that is, right? It's direct risk to your
Yeah,
brand.
yeah.
You wouldn't want your brand to be out there getting impacted or being called out for some misconfiguration or for your vulnerabilities being exploited. So that's how I look at the business impact. But again, as we all know, we cannot look at everything from the same lens. We have to have the prioritization in place. But this is how I would explain the correlation between a vulnerability and a necessary business impact.
One thing which you mentioned a few times, and I think that's a very interesting aspect. I have myself talked about it, but whenever I have done it, it's more manual. I wanted to know from you, how do you approach it? Is the aspect of controls. Are you looking at, when you're looking at vulnerabilities, you're looking at org-wide controls, like enterprise-wide controls that we have, or you're looking at locally the application level controls that are there? Do you have a place where you store all these controls, like the status of these controls, whether they're active or not? Is this correlation also slightly more manual? Like, how do you approach that?
See, again, when I look, again, let me wear the compliance hat. Okay.
Okay.
If I'm wearing a compliance hat and I'm auditing a CISO function or a security operation function responsible for vulnerability management, I'll be looking at things with a 1 and 0. Okay. give me your VA report, show me the number of vulnerabilities that you publish in this particular period, okay? Were these vulnerabilities addressed in the subsequent cycle? If not, how many got carried forward, how many got remediated, how many got added? And if the trend doesn't look good, I'll dink you from a compliance perspective. Okay. That's how I look at it from a compliance. And I wouldn't bother to look at, oh, is that vulnerability really meaningful? Oh, is there an impact? I'll just go by whatever rating is out there, critical, high, medium, low, and say so many critical open. I don't care a damn whether you had any other controls in place or not. I'm just going to say that I dink you because I don't see the numbers going down. Okay. When I wear an operational hat, I know much more than that. I'm like, look, I understand there are certain, say, high or medium vulnerabilities. The way I would look at it is a correlation. Okay. Now, clubbing those high and medium together, what is the potential attack vector that comes up with? What is the MITRE attack vector that comes up? Is there a threat path? Is there a potential cumulative, putting those vulnerabilities together, is there a potential attack waiting to happen? I'll do some correlations around that. Again, I will look at the criticality of the asset. Is this asset, how critical is the asset from a business impact? Is it internally hosted, well safeguarded, non-dev environment? Okay, I have some comfort. So those are the controls I'm talking about when I talk about, okay, it's internally hosted, not accessible from outside world. Even though there's a high vulnerability out there, the potential or the chances of it getting exploited are less compared to an asset which is exposed to internet. This is one of the control that I could assess for. Beyond that, if there is a EDR running on that asset where this vulnerability is out there,
Okay.
or there is a CSPM solution running if it's a cloud asset, or if there is a particular, we are doing this VA scans more often than not, and we know that there is a remediation roadmap for whatever right reason is taking a little longer time, that's fine. So a lot of those factors play in on deciding whether those vulnerabilities can be, how urgently they need to be prioritized. And those are the controls I'm talking about, where we look at the compensating factors around it and how to make sure. And then again, it's all about, who has access to that asset. Is that asset exposed to internet? What are the ports or the services running on that asset? A lot of those factors play in as a compensating control before we really decide from an operational, or before anyone would decide from an operational perspective, how urgently that vulnerability needs to be closed.
Okay, so thanks for shedding light into that, Vishal. So while we have talked about different challenging aspects of vulnerability management itself, right? And thanks for talking about all these practical things, which is very important. Another practical thing is, in a real environment, you also want these vulnerabilities to not just be identified, but also be fixed. And that is where I think the bigger battle starts for security teams, where we are now reaching out to the development teams, the engineering teams, the IT teams, and we just want things fixed. Approaches can be different from a security team, but the challenges that many times I have seen genuinely for development teams or engineering teams is that they have a lot of deliverables on their plate already. They have quality aspects to look for. Even if they remediate the issue, there is a process, right? They'll have to test it, they write unit tests. A lot of things are there which they have to follow, even for making any specific change to the code. And then there are other challenges in terms of the product itself. It may be, they may have their own clients to look for and talk about and make these changes. And so there are a bunch of process specific things, there are a bunch of technical challenges, time is short, and there is, because of that maybe or more, there is obviously friction when we go to these teams. Say they either, if there are too many issues like you mentioned earlier, they don't want to really fix it, there is a paralysis because everything looks irrelevant to them. Or even if there are few big issues,
more than irrelevant, it looks overwhelming to them.
Yeah.
And they say there's so much to do, let's not do anything.
Like itna to development nahi kiya jitna fix. So just as a joke, but yeah, I mean, sometimes it can really be overwhelming, even when you're looking from a security perspective, and the one who has to fix, oftentimes fixes are correlated, right? So you have to do integration testing, acceptance testing, so many other testing before you fix it for sure, right? So how do you address this friction? Because I think friction is the one big practical challenge. If you are maturing in security, you're managing vulnerabilities, and you're talking to engineering teams, that is your real test.
Let me ask you a counter question. This friction is between whom?
Between
Which
the
group?
security teams who are reporting these vulnerabilities
Who
and
are
the
involved in
engineering
this? They have
teams.
people involved, right? They
Yes,
have people involved.
yes, yes.
So there's a big people element, Neelu.
Yeah.
That's what we, in my experience, in my humble opinion, in my experience of more than 2 decades, that is what we overlook. Okay, we are too hung up in our technology. We are too hung up in our process. That is a people element that we overlook. We are not empathetic. I mean, be it security team, be it the development team, both the sides sometimes, are not empathetic as to, what the other party is trying to say. We all are trying to do our job. And as you rightly said, more often than not, the developers or the people on ground who have to fix the vulnerabilities, it's not that they don't want to do that. They are more than happy to do it. They know security first, right? Security is first, privacy is first. They are aware of what could go wrong if this is security is not taken seriously. Okay, how it would have a negative impact to their product, to their delivery, and all of that. In spite of that, they have limitation, right? They are running behind the schedule. They have their deliverables. They have their the features that have to be released and all of that, right? So from that perspective, the teams who are the security teams who are working with those have to be a little more empathetic to the end user. Finally, the way I look at things, again, my personal opinion, be it a CISO function, it's an enablement function, be it a compliance function, enablement function, we are a service provider and our end customers are the people who consume our services. The vulnerability management report that we publish to are, they are our customers who consume that. So as we say, the customer is God, that's how we have to treat them. That's a mindset that I carry. That what can I do to help that person out there so that he or she can really, one is motivated to take that step, is involved, is interested. Well, I know that person wants to, intent is there, but that person doesn't know how to do it. The person knows what to do, why to do. How is always been a question mark. That's the shift that we all need to go towards if you want to have a fixed first mindset. If we don't have that mindset in our security function, we will never be able to solve this problem. No matter what you do, no matter all these things that I told you about, that mindset has to be developed so that we can improvise on how to address that. So that is the first thing that I would suggest. You need to empathize with the person on the other side. See how you can make
Yeah,
that
yeah.
person's life easier, make it more consumable, make it security business favorable rather than business disruptive. Make it business
Yeah,
favorable.
yeah.
That's how you it is, and involve that person. Tell that person, and we have the security awareness trainings, we have these policies, we have security oath that people sign. I get it. I've done some how do I call it? Not brown bag sessions, or I go to when I'm in office, in my previous job, in my current job, I like to talk to people. I talk to people. I sit next to them. There are a bunch of people, 10, 15 people sitting, and I'm like, look, how you guys are doing? What are you doing? What are you working on? What does security mean to you? What does privacy mean to you? I don't care at which hierarchy they are on. Okay, I just want to understand what security means for them. And very often than not, what I hear from them, they are security savvy. It's just that they say, you know what, Vishal, we understand, but we don't know how to solve for it. We don't know how to get the time for it. And that's where I said, that it's easier these days with all the cloud ops function, DevOps function. Work with those functions, get them involved, get them motivated. Look, it's in your interest that you expand your role as a DevSecOps. Let's pilot some critical vulnerability. Let's prioritize this. Let's spend some time doing that due diligence. Then let's go to say Neelu is on the other end. Neelu has 100 vulnerabilities to fix, and I have come back to Neelu. Neelu, you know what? There are 100 to fix, but your assets have been more or less, you manage these set of assets, you manage these systems and all. 100 may become 110, 120 in next scan that we do. But you know what? Out of 100, let's look at this 50. Okay. Let me just sit with you for 30 minutes. Out of that 50, let me tell you how to solve for 10. Just pull up your dev environment. Let's do it right now together. And if I show that momentum to you, you will get the confidence as well. You know what, Vishal? What you're saying, it makes sense. With that one command, one click, I could remediate 10 to 15 of my vulnerabilities. You are asking me to only address 50. Say out of 50, you have given me steps for 25 of them. Good. 25, I will invest time. You yourself will say that. because you are seeing that difference, you're seeing that change happening. You'll feel more inspired that, okay, you know what, I'm making that difference. That is how the fixed first mindset will come in. So, Neelu, when we were talking about the people first mindset, about, remediation, about working with different stakeholders, empathizing with the developers, what also, in my opinion, the CISO function should do, and which I have also been doing at multiple occasions, is forming tiger teams to solve for the problems. Okay. What I mean by tiger teams, I mean, some people call it task force, some people call it tiger team, some people call it wolf team. It all depends. Okay. So what I mean by tiger team is we can form teams with a specific objective in mind. Okay. In our current context, say when we're talking about vulnerability management or the fixed first mindset, with that mindset, we form a, bring a set of people together. It need not be managers. It can all depend upon the temperament of the people, and it can be in different levels and forms that you bring in. So, for example, you can bring a vulnerability management analyst, analyst from the vulnerability management team to be part of a tiger team. The person who's responsible for running the scans, publishing the reports, prioritizations, and all of that. Then you can have a person from the DevOps or the CloudOps team who can work with this person to help her or him to see which of those can be centrally addressed, what are the remediation steps that can be built for the others, and all of that. Then you can also bring in some like-minded people from the developer team. These days we talk about the BISO function and
Okay.
other functions. So you can probably bring in a BISO, the business information security officer, or a developer who is security with a security mindset to be part of the tiger team, so that this is the close knitted team that will work together on a regular basis to prioritize, identify the remediation steps, and finally implement those remediations also on the end systems. This model can then be replicated across the ecosystem to, say, across different verticals to address those vulnerabilities. So this is also how you solve for the vulnerability, or this could be a part of the solution for the fixed first mindset or the vulnerability as a part of the vulnerability management program.
Yeah, I think it's also very partnership driven mindset, because here you are partners with the development team. I remember my days from code reviews where I used to do that, because it'd be multiple lines of code. I would sit down with the developers, and then you also know what are the challenges of actually fixing simple issues to complex issues. What does that take? How many different files you have to look into, and what that means. But in general, it teaches you what is the, first of all, what is the difficulty of fixing an issue, where you are making longer term plans for remediation. You're partnering with them or the engineering leads later on as you grow and mature. You know that some things can be prioritized based on very quick fixes. Some of them can be fixed very quickly. Some will need your help. You may come up with playbooks, with automation, and a lot of other things for the teams. And of course, they are the experts for any of the complex issues, and they can go ahead and fix that.
And then what I could also do is I could take it a step forward, Neelu, where if I identify people like you who are having that mindset that yes, I'm happy with what I'm doing, I'm adding more value, I can use you as a mascot. You are a Google expert. Let's go to other teams who are solving a similar problem on GCP. I'll take you as a mascot. See, this is how Neelu solved for her system.
Exactly, yeah.
Can you narrate the story? That is how it is a chain effect. It will go on, and you'll get bigger wins rather than me escalating to Neelu's manager or manager's manager and trying to say, oh, top down pressure, fix it. It's not fun.
And it's very motivating also for developers, because they see others doing it, so they
Correct.
also want to contribute as much as they can.
Exactly.
Amazing. So yeah, thanks for sharing that approach with us. There have been some other episodes on this. We have a lot of supply chain based episodes as well, and we have talked about this idea of vulnerabilities before, where this aspect, so this is slightly controversial, but in terms of having the governance model for this, who should have the accountability of fixing the issues. So for example, if I have discovered 100 issues or 1,000 issues, many times if it is not fixed, the accountability stands with security, because security is primarily following up in many places with the engineering teams. Or in some cases, they say it's highly effective if engineering team takes up the complete accountability and they are the ones going ahead and fixing it. And when there are issues, they should be held accountable. So where should the ownership lie according to you?
So as you said, you have discussed this in previous podcasts as well. I'm sure you would have heard different views on it, right?
Yeah.
It's everyone's personal view as to where this ownership should lie. In my view, okay, as I said earlier, be it security, compliance, or a CISO function, they are all an enablement function. Okay, we don't own anything. We are empty-handed. Whatever we do is for the company, for the assets, for the system owners, for the people who own different verticals of work and all of that. So, in a true sense, in my opinion, accountability should be with the person who owns that system or that's the line of business. Okay, because the profits come to that person. So these threats and security and the risk also should be with that person. Okay, but I'm not saying that a CISO or a CISO function will wash away their hands and all. They are equally responsible to partner closely with them to make sure that those things are getting addressed either through the way I mentioned, through collaboration, through partnership, through making it more meaningful for all the parties, or if sometimes required to take a hard stand where you escalate, you take a tough stand that look, beyond this we are not responsible. If you don't act on it, something goes wrong, it's your problem. So that's how I
Yeah.
look at it. So I'm not saying that the enablement function wash off their hand, but at the same time, they don't own the system. So how can they take accountability for it?
Yeah, yeah, well said. Um, in that context and extending it a little bit, oftentimes you will see that when accountability obviously does not come from within, in the sense that it's being pushed from outside for or from top down, like you mentioned many times, it's not very effective, right? And that, along with there is poor communication, for example, between the teams. They're not talking much. We don't know what the release cycles are. We don't know what vulnerabilities are affecting how many tech stacks we have. Many times depending on lack of data, lack of communication, lack of collaboration between teams, there can be a big divide between security and engineering teams. I wanted to know from you first how to bridge that, but secondly also if you have any stories of having done that, please share with us.
Uh, I mean, when you say bridging the gap, honestly, it's all about the way I look at it is people, right? Gone are the days where we can run a scanner, give the report, and highway or my way. It's not going to work like that. So I would say I've been a consultant in one of my previous role where my job was to scan and you know do a VA, do a penetration testing, publish a report. So one story that comes to my mind, I was at a very, I was a newbie at that time around 2006, 2007, and that was a software service provider where I was doing my consulting job. And the first year when I did a work for them, the VAPT job for them, and gave them a report, it was an Excel report, prioritized the critical vulnerabilities which were exploited, blah blah blah, and I presented that to them. Okay, and they were like, you know what? Because I was a newbie, and the people were much senior to me by with age and all. So they literally ragged me, kind of a thing I would put it. So they were like, oh, this server is a test server, big deal if you got admin access. Oh, this is what this server was, not a big deal. So they did not take the whole thing that I gave them, very, I mean, they did take it seriously, but, they put it completely down as to, not a big deal how whatever you have found is not a big deal. They addressed the vulnerabilities and everything, that's fine. Then I had a chance of auditing them or doing a VPT for them in the subsequent year as well. It was an annual review that we used to do. What I learned from that previous experience is that if you provide them information as is, and you mentioned earlier about how do you know, uh, relate it to a business impact, how do you calculate
Yeah.
the materiality of a vulnerability? If you just put them as is that, okay, this is the IP addresses, this was the vulnerability found, this is how I penetrated, and give them that. Even if you give the root access, they're like, okay, big deal, right? So I had, the first year I had published a good 30-page report, and it was like they took it, but it was like it didn't create that excitement. Second year, I remember going in just with one slide, and with one slide showing,
Okay.
okay, you gave me a set of IP addresses, This is where I started my PowerPoint presentation. Nice animated PowerPoint presentation back in 2007. This is the IP addresses I started with, and these were all on-premise. Cloud was not very prominent at that time. These are the IP addresses I started with. I ran the scans. This is, instead of telling what I've got, I showed them, okay, this is your semantic server. I have admin access here. This is a screenshot. Then I said, from here, I got into your Active Directory. Here's a screenshot. I've got into your email server. I've taken an email of your CEO. Here is a screenshot that I've sent him an email. And I've got into his inbox as well. And here's a screenshot. That one slide was good enough for me to draw attention on the impact. Okay. And finally, they didn't let me leave the room until they got it in written from me that I've deleted all that information from my system. That was a long night for me. Okay? So what I learned from that experience, Neelu, is whenever you're doing whatever you're doing in vulnerability management program, you need to articulate what is your objective, why are you doing, what are you doing, and if you don't do this, what does it mean for them? That articulation is important, and that articulation differs from level to level. So if I'm talking to a developer, that articulation will be very different as compared to when I'm talking to the segment lead versus when I'm talking to a mid-level manager, right? Because the impact to a manager would be like, okay, so many vulnerabilities impacted on his project and all, he might lose a customer. A developer might lose his job, or he might might not be called out to a good security first mindset developer and all. For a segment lead, it might be a bigger customer impact, right? So that articulation is important at different levels, and you need to articulate based on the audience you're talking to. So that is how I've learned to bridge the gap.
I think this is so beautiful point that you have brought up, Vishal, and this is the same thing in one way or another, even I have learned. So articulation, or I would say storytelling, of course it changes when you are from a hardcore technical, you're talking to a developer versus you're talking to the manager versus you're talking to a solutions lead, or you're talking to org lead and things like that. But you're always telling that story. So specifically when you're doing big things, you're running programs, you are telling that story to maybe thousands of developers and saying that, you onboard to a certain platform or to a certain tool or get this on your pipeline. And while it is highly non-technical, I think it creates a maximum impact in terms of adoption, in terms of change on the ground, because on the ground things start changing. So it's not just the fear, I think it's the impact and the emotional connect that they start having. They understand the relevance, they understand their role, and they start contributing accordingly depending on how good your story is. So thanks for sharing that point. This is something that even I have seen. So I really wanted to call that out, like at all different levels, and it's so true.
And that's what I learned in the earlier year of my career itself. That look, no matter how much I work, if I'm not able to articulate a message across to the audience, it's not going to work. It's not going to help anyone. It's not going to help anyone.
Yeah, it's not relevant for them anyway. So
exactly.
Thanks for sharing that with us. Any last words, Vishal, for all of us security enthusiasts who are trying to manage vulnerabilities before we log off?
I would say it's all about people first mindset. Don't forget. I know we have a job to do. We have a tough job where we have to remediate, get those vulnerabilities remediated. We have to, make sure that we keep our organization secure and all of that. But it's a people first mindset that we should carry. And that will make you successful in not only your role that you perform, but also in delivering and making a meaningful impact of what you're trying to do.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining us today on Breakpoint, Vishal.
Thank you so much, Neelu. Pleasure is likewise. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We will see you all in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.
Thank you.